The question of NPCs in a solo session is a vexing one because they are the moment when, at least I feel the absence of a GM the most. They are different than combat because the tropes of combat and the stats for the monsters and things are so readily available that it can be scripted for you in a sense, and there is more scaffolding there to conduct a combat. And those of us that have played tabletop RPGs for a long time, we can have a sense of visualizing combat, whether or not we use minis, of what the combat moves may be, and the apparatus, the rule set for whatever you're using is likely to go into great detail about combat. NPCs are a different story, though, because that is where, first of all, there's less existing apparatus, I think, in all the major rule sets I should say all the traditional rule sets that describes different types of NPC interaction. And also, they can be the moment of a narrative turning point. And for soloists, we know that having these turning points, having the narrative driven forward is vital, and also where we can sometimes falter. So I thought I would return to Dungeon Module B1 in Search of the Unknown by Mike Carr. This is an introductory module for the basic Dungeons & Dragons basic set. It is copyright it's from TSR, copyright 7981 TSR Hobbies. This is my second video based in this module, and I'll put a link down below to the first one where I discuss the characters and they go into a room and I give an example of combat. Here I want to talk about NPC interaction and make some suggestions for how to effectively have this in your own adventures. And to do that, we are going to go to the Wizard's Workroom here, which is room 8 of this module, and this is for a particular reason, and that reason is one way to introduce an NPC and have it automatically seem a little bit more natural is to put them in a place where you might expect to see somebody. And in this case, we have begun in an abandoned house, basically, but so we were in many different rooms. The other video showed us in a kitchen. There are rooms here that would potentially have NPCs also. There is maybe not the closet, possibly a lounge. There's a wizard's chamber. I demonstrated being in the kitchen. There's a dining room. But I'm bringing us to the wizard's workroom here because there's something built in. There's a little bit of a narrative built in where we can see what we might get and want to interact with somebody to give us some narrative advancement, and that is going to be the goal of this interaction. What I'm going to do first to determine who this NPC is, and I'll just briefly review what I mentioned in the other video, which is that from the D&D basic rules, before I started to play this out, I went through and I keyed the list of monsters to the story. So the numbers here are representing actual monsters, and then if I saw something like this random elf that could be an NPC, I denoted it with an N3. So to get in this listing, there were only 8, I think there was 8, maybe it's 9, let me see. Right, only 8 NPCs. So I'm just going to do this randomly, and I'll take my D8 and we will roll. We saw in the last video I'm having a little challenge here with my my die rolling. So we're going to roll this D8 to see which NPC we are going to find standing in this wizard's workroom, and then we'll discuss how we interact. We rolled a 1. The number 1 NPC in this list is our doppelganger. Interesting. These man-sized, shape-changing creatures are intelligent and evil. A doppelganger is able to shape itself into the exact form of any human-like creature it sees. Once in the form of the person it is imitating, it will always attack that person. Its favorable trick is to kill the original person in some way without the party knowing. Then, in the role of that individual, it will attack the others by surprise, often when the party is already engaged in combat. Sleep and charm spells do not affect it. It saves as a fighter due to their highly magical nature. When killed, it will turn back into its original form. Well, unfortunately, when I was doing this, I didn't look at the descriptions when I was keying it. Had I done that, I would have actually keyed that as a monster because it clearly just attacks. And what I'm trying to show here is some non-attacking interaction. However, be that as it may, we're just going to disregard that and still deal with this doppelganger as if it were not simply attacking us, and I want to demonstrate this type of encounter. However, what we do need to do is see who really is going to be the person that it is going to be interacting with, and that will be the first person into the room. Because I'm just coming in here as a demo to you, I did not have a party order, so I'm going to need to create that now, and I'm going to do that by, I have these, I was playing something else, I have these counters here, 1, 2, and 3, 4. So let's do this. We're going to see how this works. We've got our party here, and I will just here in my hand, not looking, pull up a 3. I have one more. I'm going to be one short, a 2. This is going to be something, and I have to be, yes, this will be the 1, and that'll be 4. Not the best way, but this is how it is. So the number 1 person in the room is our boy magician. So this is going to be what the doppelganger is seeing, what the doppelganger is mimicking. And in fact, this is interesting because it says here that it's highly magical, the doppelganger. So that makes sense because what we have here, our story, is this boy magician is being accompanied by this elderly cleric, and they're going through this environment to somehow a cleric and its protectors, the thief and the fighter, is trying to get the boy magician somewhere to level up, to learn, to develop his magical qualities into something more than they are right now. And we also know that this, prior in the other video we learned, this boy magician has a trinket. He's carrying a brass ring that never tarnishes, so this suggests perhaps it is something magical. And the other characters are carrying, our thief has a hilt from a broken sword, and he also picked up a broken shield. Again, this is suggesting something to me. Maybe they need to encounter some type of magic in order to make this stuff work. I don't know. Maybe this doppelganger is going to be the source of that information. The fighter is carrying a trinket. It's a small idol that gives somebody unsettling dreams if they sleep or rest next to it. And finally, our cleric has a tiny mechanical crab or spider. Now, let's go back to the environment that we find this doppelganger in, and I will just mark the page here so we can easily get back to it. Have a look at the wizard's workroom. Zeligar's workroom and laboratory, which is room 9 here, are located adjacent to each other with limited access by secret doors. The workroom is a facility designated for various purposes related to the study and practice of magic. There are several large wooden tables within the room, one of which is overturned on its side, as well as one central table made of stone. The top of this prominent table is a slab of smooth black slate, although its cold black beauty is hidden by a thick layer of dust. None of the tables have anything upon them. There are several chairs and stools scattered about. Along the north wall, there's wooden cabinets, approximately 4 feet off the floor, not locked. They contain various chemical compounds and supplies of no particular value in glass or earthen containers. There are 40 such containers, as well as one large jar described here. If the adventurers choose to open and examine the contents of any one, roll a d20 to determine what it is. And then it goes on to say what happens if you try to eat it, whatever you find. And the larger jar is of clear glass and seemingly contains a black cat's body floating in a clear liquid. The liquid's going to evaporate, the cat will spring to life, excuse me, jump out and run for the door. Even if the door isn't open, it's going to pass through it and it will never be seen again. This occurrence has no special meaning other than to surprise and or mystify the adventurers, as well as provide some fun for the DM. And we have a little picture here even. So this, by the way, I should have said this at the beginning, for those of you that are watching this series for the first time, not going to be a very visual series. We're talking 3-ring binders here and some possibly some illustrations, definitely in black and white. In any case, we have the setting. We have walked into this wizard's workroom, and the boy magician, in his excitement, maybe in his feeling of the presence of magic that he is yearning to imbibe more into his being, comes in first. Maybe he even rushes in, and he is startled to see himself. He sees himself standing there, and that is the encounter with this NPC. So how do we play this out? The first thing that I need to do is get some sense of the reaction that is going to be had here. Now, I'm working here from the D&D basic rule book. So what I'm taking, the material I'm taking, is going to remain true to this for right now. Of course, you could be using many other apparatus to do this, but I'm just trying to stick to the basic here. So there's a couple things to note first. First of all, we note that the doppelganger's alignment is chaotic, which is going to mean in this case that he's really focused, appropriately self-centered, and really focused is going to be just keeping his focus on the boy magician, not really interacting so much with the rest of the party. I also want to go to the monster reaction table here, because he is, in the larger scope, a monster. This is an encounter, and I'm going to roll the 2d6 to get the reaction. In this particular case, if I happen to roll a 2, I'm going to re-roll, because the point here is not to have combat. The point here is to illustrate some other type of interaction. So I need to account for that with my rolling, and we are going to see what type of initial reaction we get. The other thing I could do is to roll for surprise. Now, surprise is what you will be rolling for initially with combat to see whether there is a benefit to either side. Even though we're not having combat here, I may do that just to see how it impacts the interaction. But let's first of all see what type of reaction he's going to have. And we roll a 6, which is he's going to be hostile, possibly attacking, possibly not, but we're dealing with somebody hostile here. To roll for surprise, what we need to do is we're going to take 2d6s, and one is going to represent us and one is going to represent him. And on a 1 or 2, that side will be surprised. So we are this d6 and he is that d6. A 1 or a 2 for either of these is going to mean surprise, and then we'll talk about surprise if it happens. We are surprised. We would be surprised, right? The boy magician runs in to this room with his party following, excited to finally get to the wizard's workroom and look around and investigate and maybe get something, and he sees himself. So it makes total sense that he's surprised. Well, what does that mean in this context? In this context, it means that the doppelganger is going to approach the the party, and in particular the boy wizard. But first we need to see how far away he is. And so this is determined by a d4 roll to see what the distance is. So if we get a 1, he's already really close. And if we get a 2, he's a few feet away. 3, he's even further, and 4, he's really on the other side of the room. So first, let's see where he is at the beginning of this encounter. He's 1. He's already close. So they walked in. He's already close. And in this particular case now, because he is aggressive and because we have been surprised, there is going to be some physical contact. The doppelganger is going to grab his own image, maybe in fear, maybe in just surprise. And in so doing, we have to remind ourselves what the boy magician is carrying. So that's not him. Here he is. Well, he's got no armor. He's got just a dagger, and he's got this trinket, this brass ring that never tarnishes. And so he also has a spell to charm a person. Interesting. So the doppelganger is already close, grabs him, and as he's holding him, he feels through the cloak of the magician, of the boy magician, through his own cloak, he feels the ring or something smooth underneath the soft fabric of the cloak, and he fumbles for it, and he is grabbing for it, and our boy magician now doesn't want to lose his only precious possession. Even though it's a trinket, it's really all he has. So does he reach for his dagger, or does he reach for a spell? Now, of course, you can just make your own determination about what he's going to do, but in this case, I am going to let the fate decide what he's going to do, and we are going to turn to my basic percentile table that I've used for years. I don't even know where I got it. Here it is. Let's unfold it here. And we're going to ask the question, does he reach for his dagger? I'm going to say that it is unlikely, maybe even very unlikely. It's unlikely. He's afraid, but this is himself. He's seeing himself. And if you were seeing yourself, would you reach for your dagger? I think that would be unlikely. So I'm not going to go with very because he's afraid. So we're going to roll our percentile die here and see, does he reach for his dagger? It's going to be on a roll of 41 or greater. He will not reach for that dagger. Let's see. Wow, 45. He thinks hard about this. Quickly, he thinks hard about this, doesn't reach for his dagger. Instead, he's going to try to cast his spell. Unfortunately, as we note when we check back at the stats for this doppelganger, it says quite clearly, sleep and charm spells do not affect doppelgangers. So, it also says they save as a fighter. They save as a fighter 10. The boy magician is frozen, and his savior, the guardian who is accompanying this party, who is in fact leading this whole party into this situation, the cleric steps forward and casts his remove fear spell on the doppelganger. What the effect of this spell will be is to calm the doppelganger so that they can have a conversation, that he can remove his hands from the clutches of his doppelganger, and the party can gain some information perhaps about the room that they're in and where they need to go. So it says that the doppelganger is going to do a save as a fighter 10. Let me find that. Here we have the saving throw table, and it's so a fighter would save as for against a spell, it would be a 16, but here there's a note, saving throws for higher level characters, they're going to get a +2 on the save. to reflect their greater skill and ability. And it does tell us specifically here, fighter 10. I'm going to say that we need to give this +2 bonus. So to resist the cleric's remove fear spell, our doppelganger here is going to be rolling, and he is going to get a +2 on his roll. Let's give him this. Love this color combo, but so his save, let's see, we were back here at 16. He's looking for a 16 or greater. He's going to get a +2 for his, he's saving as a fighter 10, so I'm going to count that as higher level. And he rolls a 4 +2. He cannot resist this cleric's remove fear spell, and that makes total sense because we have a 3rd level experienced cleric, even though he's elderly, even though this is perhaps his last adventure anywhere, his last ditch effort to do something in the world. He is able to cast his remove fear spell. The doppelganger calms down, is no longer afraid, and is open to our party. And in fact, the likelihood now that he is going to ask the party and approach the party in a favorable manner is greatly increased. So he is open to the party, stands there, looks around, takes his focus off just himself, and engages with his eyes the cleric, the thief, and the fighter, who are all standing there. There is a calm. They all look around and they move toward the table, and the doppelganger now gestures toward the north wall where are the wooden cabinets and the various chemical compounds, and is offering them to our party. He is making an offering at this point. So let's roll a d20 and see what it is that they decide to take. They roll an 18. This is bone powder. So now we have acquired some bone powder from the doppelganger, and we'll give it to the boy magician. Why not? So he's now carrying some bone powder as well. We have noticed in our description that the access to the wizard's laboratory, where we want to go next, there are some hidden doors there, and we would like to ask the doppelganger to show us where the hidden door is. And we could do this in many ways, but I'm going to keep it simple and simply go back to my table here. What is the likelihood that he is going to show us the door? Well, initially I would say it would have been unlikely, but he's feeling a little more open toward us, so I'm going to give it a 50-50 chance that he will show us the way into the next room at this point. And so we will roll here our percentile die to ask on a 1 to 50, yes, he is going to show us the way into the other door. And indeed, could not be that easy. A definitive no, he is not. He turns around, he's a little bit angry again. The charm spell is still working, the remove fear spell is still working, but he is a little bit angry and defensive, and now he is pointing his finger at his likeness, pointing at the corner of his cloak, and he is pointing, we know, toward that ring, beckoning his likeness to hand it over to him. Do we do that? Yes, we do. Our boy magician reaches into his pocket, extends his hand with the brass ring that never tarnishes. The doppelganger grabs it, and all of a sudden vanishes out of the room. Our party turned to each other, looking to see where he went and trying to follow him out the entrance, but there's nothing to be seen. There is no visible exit to this room. I'm going to stop here and just discuss what the function of that little scene could be in your story. The effect of that is to provide your party with a number of different possibilities of things to do. So I was just jotting some of them down here. I mean, the most obvious one is, well, how are they going to get out of that room? There are no obvious exits. They could backtrack, but historically, we're not going to do that. We want to move forward. We know that per the module, we know that the next room is the wizard's lab, and that's where they want to go. So obviously, the question is, how do we get out of the room? A secondary question is, how important is that brass ring? The doppelganger is now running around somewhere with it. Do we care or not? You may be asking yourself, well, how did that happen? You know, why did the doppelganger run away with it? This just happened in my mind. I mean, this is just what I saw happening as I was telling the story out loud, and as a result of that action, then some narrative possibilities open up. So there is no rule for this, and this is part of playing out these stories and creating this type of narrative in this manner. Things just happen. You make them happen. So people often ask, well, where's the surprise? You know that you were going to say that. Well, I didn't actually know that I was going to say that. So there's that element of quote unquote surprise. But also, when you are doing this, I think the notion of surprise has to be thought of more as a revelation or an unfolding of a story and a narrative. So back to where we leave our party, first of all, how are they going to get out of the room? Well, we look to see what they have. They got this bone powder, and I look again to see who's carrying what. And our cleric here, who again was the one who successfully got them somewhere, at least with this doppelganger, his little trinket is this tiny mechanical crab or spider. Maybe that can be set off around the room to do some checking to see if there is an obvious exit. Another possibility would be for them to look at this bone powder that they got and determine, well, we know it's magical in some way. Could it be used? We have the thief is carrying this hilt from a broken sword, and he got this from a body that he was examining. Well, actually, the hilt from the broken sword was a trinket. He got a broken wooden shield from a body that he was examining earlier, and maybe the bone powder could somehow be used with one of these to turn them into something that would help them out of the room. I don't know. The brass ring is now gone, and let's see, our fighter, he has this small idol that gives unsettling dreams when when you rest next to it. I'm not sure that really fits in narratively, but to me, looking at this, I'm seeing this mechanical crab or something being deployed, as it were, in the room. Now, while this is happening, time will be passing and turns will be happening. So as a result of that, we would be conducting the wandering monster role per the rules of this module. So a wandering monster could show up, and we have something to do. Now, again, you might say to yourself, well, you made that thing for you to do. Yes, I did. I mean, we make everything for us to do in this way of playing RPGs and of creating a sense of place. But I have in my mind these characters here. I also can return back to the description I'm given, and looking again, we have this something called a prominent table with a slab of smooth black slate. Could that be a door? Could that be a portal? Could that be an exit in some way? These are questions that you can open up and ask yourself, and use whatever supporting oracles or emulators are your preferred scaffolding to answer. When you run into a blockade, go back to an existing description, if there is one. Again, this is a very specific way of playing using a very specific module, and comments in the other video said, well, the problem is there's no surprise here. And that is true in the sense of running through this in a linear way. But when we're doing solo play,
we are looking for everything is the same and everything is different. In other words, there's some surprise in that I didn't realize I was going to have the guy run away. There is surprise in the randomness that you get and in the way that you find yourself bringing the narrative and the questions that you ask. I mean, it's all a construct, right? I mean, everything that we're doing is a construct, just as everything that a DM would be doing in a game is a construct. The difference is that we are having to be both of those things. And so, yes, it is true that you can't have surprise in the same way as you would sitting around a table where the DM says something that you had no idea he or she was going to say. On the other hand, you can get so involved in your own narrative that you bring it to a place where you didn't realize it would go. And the point here, the point of this video and of this little demonstration is that if you were watching this, if you were one of the people that was watching this from the beginning, and when I just kind of stopped, thought to yourself, what? I mean, what's happening? Why is she stopping? Why is something else not happening? Then the demonstration achieved its purpose. The NPC, the interaction achieved its purpose of getting you hooked into a narrative, of having you sort of look around the corner, as it were, for the next thing that was going to happen. And if you think to, say, sessions, RPG sessions that you have played with a group, you could realize perhaps that there is a lot of time when, quote unquote, nothing is happening, when there's talk, where there's conversation, there's description, and this is what we are trying to do here for ourselves in creating a narrative and in having a non-combat kind of situation. And let me just say again, I sort of glossed over this or implied it in the beginning, but I want to be explicit about it. Of course, NPCs can be, you can have combat with NPCs. I am simply, in this demonstration, I'm using the NPC to sort of stand in for a non-combat interaction to demonstrate that, to show that. Of course, you can absolutely have an NPC coming in just like any other monster or encounter and have combat with them. The other thing that I wanted to point out and say was that I got my NPC from the D&D basic rules here, and I showed you where that was. In the module B1, they actually have in the back of it a little tables for rolling up NPCs that are within this module. So you could turn to page, there's actually quite a lot in here for NPCs. So you have even the chance of an NPC coming in based on the number of player characters that you have, and this is actually quite useful, to extrapolate to other games if you're sort of looking for or wanting some sense of how often somebody should show up. That is an interesting table. And then there are a bunch of different tables here that you could roll on, D12 tables to just see what type of class they are, and then there are D6 tables here for their attitude, the type of courage they have, their general disposition and loyalty. All right, let me reorient here. So looking at this table here, or these four tables here, they're D6 tables for the attitude, whether what type of courage they have, the loyalty that they have, and their disposition. So you could add this in and come up with a general personality type pretty easily and pretty randomly. And then there are stats that you can roll up for the NPCs. So there are, within this particular module, the rules for doing that. I went to the basic rule book and the setup that I had already predetermined with my numbering system because I wanted to bring in something with a little bit more character. I wanted to bring in something that had an already existing explanation to it, and some of my other options would have been, let's see, I think there were only 8 of them that I identified. So for example, this elf, it even says here this elf can also appear as an NPC. So obviously I took that as a guide, but it doesn't, and the dwarf as well. And it explains that what the elf has, it has a spell. So had I encountered the elf, I might have needed to do a little bit more work, for example, to see what type of spell that it had. And it will tell you additionally there could be a possible group of 15 or more elves. Now that's at a magnitude that I am not playing, but it gives you enough information here that you could play that out with some guidance, and some guidance from the rule set is always useful because it takes you a little bit further and provides some of the narrative for you. So in this particular case, it worked out that it was a doppelganger who was not one of the ones that said could be an NPC. Here are the halflings, but I had decided that that could be the case. So to sum up, I think that having NPCs in when doing something solo is challenging. Well, it's challenging for me. Obviously, I can only speak for myself. For me, it is challenging. It is a challenge to do something that's not a traditional combat encounter with a typical type of monster. It is challenging to make a situation where there is not immediate clarity that there's going to be conflict even. Forget combat, but there might not even be conflict, because then it forces you into some type of narrative, of story, of decision making, and this is where I think the discomfort of the solo GM, at least for myself, is the most evident, because it deviates the most. What you're doing is deviating the most from a traditional tabletop session where you have a GM and you have fellow players, because you have to really create everything. Once you get into a combat situation, you can, to some extent, simulate an opposition side with random tables and whatever, and you're in a pre-existing structure of combat. It's more comfortable. But the more free-form situation of encountering an NPC and dealing with them in perhaps a non-combat way, again, you can always have combat with them, but in this case, a non-combat way is challenging. Now, likewise, you could also encounter just a random monster and deal with them in a non-combat way, but I didn't show that here. I focused on the NPC because I think that's traditionally where you would find that, at least in a traditional type of dungeon crawl that we're doing here.